Great Monday. Welcome to the King Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined today with my special guest I'm excited to talk to, Ray Nutting from nDepth Security. How you doing this morning, Ray?
Wonderful, wonderful, beautiful Monday. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Excellent, excellent. Now, one of the questions I always like to ask people, just really kind of set the tone. This may sound kind of strange. I don't know if you've heard this kind of terminology before, the way it's be worded, but my question is this: on a scale from 0 being life sucks to 10 being life is awesome, where would you say your spiritual engine number is right now in this moment?
Oh, 10, man. 10. Yeah. I'm very humble. I'm very blessed. And, I'm, happy to be alive, man. Happy to be here. I've had a, pretty successful career over the past, almost 11 years now with nDepth. So, I'm very blessed. I got a wonderful family. So, can't say anything else, man. I'm just happy.
Excellent, excellent. And the reason I asked that question is because I've learned through the years that if anyone answers the question 5 or below, because we all bring whatever energy, issues, circumstances right before the podcast start. And if a person's at a 5 because of those circumstances, it's best to reschedule because it's not going to be engaged. It's going to be adversarial. So, but you've been in 10, I match you with a 10, and we're going to have a great show. So thank you for indulging with that question.
Appreciate it. Absolutely, man.
All right, so let's begin. My first question I really want to begin with is nDepth Security. The name, the origin. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. So I started nDepth back in 2014. I come from a line of federal work. I did a lot of stuff out in private industry as well. And I worked for a lot of large companies, worked for some small companies, and I kind of thought that I had something to give. And brushing up in my early 30s, I thought, hey, time like the present. So I wanted to roll the dice and take a chance. nDepth Security. It's funny because you'll see the N, and nDepth kind of stands out a little bit, right? So that's represents my last name, Nutting, right? And nDepth Security really talks about just that, right? Going in depth with security, right? So not just different things from cybersecurity, but it's everything, right? It's relationships with customers. It's engaging in industry. A lot of the things we do is within the federal industry, right? So we're kind of limited within that industry perspective. But over the past couple of years, we've been kind of branching out. We've been getting into state, local education markets. We've been getting into a lot of commercial stuff as well. So really, nDepth Security is all about our customers, right? Providing services. We do a lot of staff augmentation, but really engaging with our clients and understanding their requirements, right? And helping them succeed in their businesses, right? Especially those who don't have cybersecurity. They don't have an organization and they don't have personnel to support, right? nDepth is there to help those organizations grow and be successful.
Excellent, excellent. Now, I want to ask a very simple, generic question that a lot of people may assume that is clear, but I've learned that through my years that certain questions we're not usually on the same page. I'm really focused on communication. A lot of people make a lot of assumptions that people know the definition and they operate from the same definition. So with that context, how would you define cybersecurity and the importance of it as well?
Oh, cybersecurity in a whole, I think cybersecurity is different for every organization. On the surface, a lot of organizations, I think, tend to look at, they'll look at data privacy. They'll look at, things on the, from a network perspective. What am I connecting into? What are my applications? Are they secure? Are we meeting certain standards? Or so there's different facets, and I think it's different for every organization. But cyber security in a whole, tends to represent everything that organization touches, right? It could be your employees working on the computer, your engaging with other organizations. It could be your cloud infrastructure. It's also your physical infrastructure. It makes up a lot of things, right? And I think organizations nowadays have started to implement, different frameworks to help them understand what they have in their network, what they have in their organization, to help define what cybersecurity is within their organizations. But cyber really touches a lot of aspects within the organization, and providing that security, right, helps restrict access, ensure data privacy, ensure encryption, all those basic things and functions. Right? Is kind of what cybersecurity brings to the table.
Excellent, excellent. Now, Ray, you have a lot of acronyms behind some of the accomplishments in your career, and I just kind of want to briefly touch on some of those and give a little definition to those, really set the context of why people should be listening to you and what you bring to our discussion about cybersecurity today. So, for example, CISSP-ISSEP. What is that, for example? And
yeah, so CISSP, that certification, Certified Information System Security Professional, that's through ISC². It's funny, it's a pretty hard test to take. It's like 250 questions. I failed it a couple times. Took it pretty early in my career, and I think on the third time I passed. And then ISSEP, that's the Engineering Professional certification through ISSE or through ISC². And I actually passed that one on the first try back in 2014. And so, the CISSP, has to talk about, obviously the 10 domains, within security, right? So whether it's physical, whether it's network, whether it's information level, whatever, right? So it kind of brings out the full facet of how security is represented within an organization, and how people who hold that certification can work towards achieving something in cybersecurity for that organization, whether it's some type of standard, whether it's there's different people that branch, or different professions that kind of branch off of that certification. Offensive security, defensive security, CISOs typically have that certification. So really, it's more of a all-encompassing certification. ISSEP is really around engineering principles, cybersecurity engineering principles, regarding which security requirements are applicable to whatever organization, whether they're whether it's an information system, or whether it's physical security controls, or whatever it is. It's understanding the security requirements, right, regarding maybe a product or something within the organization, but just having a general understanding of what those security requirements are. A lot of the ISSEP certifications are tied to very specific roles. Some of those within the NIST RMF framework, like you'll have an information system security engineer. They have a specific role within that process, and usually people who have an ISSEP fall into that category as an ISSE, right, managing information systems.
Okay. Now, I notice you also have published several cybersecurity certification guides from McGraw-Hill Publishing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit.
So back in 2017, McGraw-Hill came to me and said, "Hey Ray, any you interested in writing a certification guide for us doing pen testing? We received a couple comments and feedback that you might be a good candidate." And I said, "Whoa, I don't know. I've never done that before." And so it was kind of interesting. I'm glad I did it. It took me about 9 months to write my first book. That was originally the CompTIA PenTest Plus certification was going to be the CPT Plus, Certified Pen Tester, or Certified Penetration Tester, and then they changed the name on us, and then not too much of the content changed, but it was just kind of interesting how that whole thing evolved. First book I ever wrote. I published some papers and did a lot of writing out in the federal community before, but nothing public, right? And so it was definitely interesting. I definitely liked it. It was a great process working with McGraw-Hill, going through the whole formality of kind of developing the not just the content from the book, but from the structure and taking it one chapter at a time. It was pretty great and pretty rewarding at the end. I think I spent probably about over 2,000 hours writing content, and working with my tech editor and so forth to transition a lot of that rough draft stuff into final polished product. So it's really great. I got a lot of feedback from industry over the years on the initial certification, and helped quite a few people pass. Some people didn't like the book. A lot of people did like the book. So it was pretty cool, very rewarding experience. And I said I wouldn't do it again, and then I did. It's kind of funny, but yeah, the whole process of writing a certification guide that maps to a certification standard is pretty intense, right? You want to make sure that you provide real world experience, and you also want to make sure that that experience that you're providing in the book, right, really maps to the certification, right? So you can't give the answers away, but you want to make sure that your readers totally understand the content, right? And then when they go to read, whatever they're reading, they can understand it. There's practical examples and exercises, and make sure that you have lots of example test questions that they can use for the certification guide. I ended up writing hundreds and hundreds of exam questions that they could use for practice, right? And which was pretty cool. A lot of them made it in the book, some of them didn't. But again, it was a great experience. I'd recommend it for anybody who's kind of on the fence on doing it in the future. And but yeah, I enjoyed the experience, and I might do it again in the future. Who knows?
Will either of those books be good reference material for someone getting started in cybersecurity, or are they more of someone who has to be?
Yeah. So as far as so I wrote the PenTest Plus through McGraw-Hill, the first revision. That was pretty good. Then I wrote the what was it, the GPen book through McGraw-Hill that was mapped to the SAN certification, and then the PenTest Plus 2 revision. So I would say all three books are very good from a reference standpoint. As I'm sure the audience knows, that technology changes, it evolves, and so tools change. Some techniques and methodologies may change, but a lot of it stays the same, right? Case in point, the NIST Special Publication 800-115 talks about security testing in general, right? That was made back in like 2008, right? And it's still relevant to this day, right? The penetration testing execution standard is another reference, and that was made back in the early 2000s. So that's still a good reference. So these books all reference a lot of that content. They reference a lot of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is all still relevant, and a lot of the same testing methodologies that we've used over the past decade or so are still used in practice today, right? So I would say all three books are good references. I'd say from a certification standpoint, if you're taking the certification, as far as the PenTest Plus, it's still pretty good reference, either version 1 or version 2. For that, I wouldn't use it as your only study guide. I mentioned that in all my books, that never use that one book as your only tool, right, for certification testing. But I would say it's still relevant, right? I would think the first revision you could probably find used or Kindle or something out there, and but they're all really good. And a lot of the big point I wanted to focus on with the first revision of PenTest Plus was reporting and communication. Over my 20 plus years, in the field, and over half of that just doing offensive security and penetration testing, I found doing hundreds of pen tests that you've got to have great communication skills. You got to be able to write a report, and you've got to be able to communicate your findings, and there's security weaknesses to your customer, right? That's the product that you're providing to them, right? That final report. And even nowadays, not just the final report, but regression testing and retesting, are also deliverables for a lot of customers to make sure that they're closing the gaps, right? So they need a cybersecurity practitioner that they can trust and they can rely on, right? So our customers find the value in that. So I tried to take that and try to show face, because there wasn't a whole lot of references out there on report writing. I mean, let me take that back. There are some references, but there wasn't anything that really tied, specifically what we should be putting in these pen test reports, right? So, I used a lot of the penetration testing execution standard. I used 800-115. I used OWASP. I used a lot of the FedRAMP guidance for pen testing. And, I incorporated a lot of that into the book, into that reporting and communication chapter. And a lot of it was overkill for the test, but I thought that the readers should know that, because Pentest Plus is an entry-level certification getting into the field to become a penetration tester or security analyst or whatnot. So I thought there was a lot of value adding that in there for the readers in general.
Excellent, excellent. Now, I know that cybersecurity is important and necessary in every industry, but we really want to kind of focus this podcast on one industry in particular, and the industry goes by the acronym of SLED. So let's talk about that acronym and kind of what that industry and some of the challenges that the industry is facing as it relates to cybersecurity.
Oh yeah, sure. So SLED, state, local education, it's made up of lots of government entities, right? Probably over 90-some thousand, probably been over 100,000. I don't know. Don't quote me on that, but it's big, right? They're, as far as their spending, I would probably say they're in the trillions. I think there's some references, some sources out there with USA spending and some other ones out there. It's over $4 trillion in total spending, right? So that's pretty big, right? It's a pretty big market. Smaller than federal, but it's pretty big, right? I'd say out of all that spending, probably 140, 160 billion, I think, is spent in IT services, and cybersecurity is kind of taken from that budget, right? And probably 1 to 2%, from some sources online, are probably spent directly for cybersecurity, right? So you figure it costs a lot of money for IT to keep IT up, keep software up, keep those things up, right? And then there's like this small little sliver, right, that's available for cybersecurity, right? So what does that mean? A lot of what we found, we've been in the SLED market for a little while. We've been supporting them for quite a few years, right? And we've got customers from the West Coast and the East Coast. We've done a lot of vulnerability assessments, penetration testing, security controls assessments towards various frameworks, such as the cybersecurity framework and RMF and Center for Internet Security. They vary. You know what I mean? So every organization has their own frameworks that they like to implement, right, and to map everything towards. But we've supported various municipalities, financial and funding institutions, education, and so on. And what's interesting is, from a cybersecurity perspective, some of them don't actually have a full budget, right? So some of their funding comes from federal, right? Whether it's DHS or whatever, through a grant to help fund certain activities, right? There's, I would say a good portion of organizations receive a lot of federal grants to do just that, right? Whether it's to do a vulnerability assessment, penetration test, whether it's to do some type of security controls testing, whether it's to do both of those, whether it's to help manage and run their cybersecurity program. It varies, right? The mileage varies there, and their needs vary, right? Which makes it a very unique market, right? When you do the type of services or provide the type of services that nDepth Security does, right? So there could be, our assessments usually run 30 to 45 days. We have some assessments that could run up to 6 months. And then we have some customers that want annual and option year contracts, right? Similar to federal contracts, to where we'll do testing, every quarter, which is great. Those organizations who actually have defined budgets, right? Some of them, they haven't, we'll get in and we'll we'll get hired, or they'll ask us to do a pen test, and we actually start the pen test, and they're not ready for a pen test, right? So we'll start getting in there doing a vulnerability assessment, just starting to identify some things. We're like, whoa, when's the last time you had a pen test, right? And they're like, never. We've never had this stuff done, right? Or they're using different tools, or the tools that are configured aren't configured in the right way to capture the data they should be capturing, right? So kind of what I'm getting at, King, is the SLED market's very big. It's very diversified, and there's a lot of different things that are going on and different requirements from different organizations within that space. I could talk all day about SLED space and about different things that are happening, but I could just say it's a great place to be in. We do a lot of stuff within federal government, within commercial space, and SLED is a great space to be in and continue to work with our customers and future customers with securing their infrastructure through some of the services we can provide.
Excellent, excellent. Now I know we're using a lot of terms that most of our listening audience may be familiar with, but just kind of want to get some definition for those who may not be familiar with. So you say vulnerability and penetration testing. Can you kind of talk a little bit about defining vulnerability and penetration testing?
Yeah, sure. So it's funny. I talk about this in my books too, as well. As a lot of people, they wrap their mind around these terms, right? So I'll kind of describe them from our perspective, right? So vulnerability assessments help identify the weaknesses. Penetration testing helps validate that those vulnerabilities exist and that they're exploitable, right? And what the impact is to the organization, right? You can do a vulnerability assessment, and then you can do like a tabletop exercise to say, well, this could happen, and these things, it could impact us this way, right? But from a vulnerability or from a pen testing perspective, you could validate that vulnerability exists, but then through that vulnerability, you could expose another vulnerability, and then another vulnerability, and then another vulnerability, right? That you may not see with a scanner or like a purpose-built scanner or something, right? So again, vulnerability assessments help identify weaknesses. Pen testing helps validate those weaknesses.
Okay. And does a company have to mitigate every vulnerability they have? Like once it's been detected, vulnerability?
No. They never do. Yeah. So how they do that is a lot of it is through prioritization, right? And they do that through, some organizations have their own scoring mechanisms. With CISSP, you learn qualitative and quantitative analysis. That's where you take something that is from a qualitative perspective. It's like, hey, you have Telnet open on port 23 or something, and people, you have clear text credentials going over the wire. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean from a manager standpoint? Well, you take that qualitative, you make it quantitative, and you can use different frameworks. There's the CVSS scoring system. There's CIS has their own thing. There's different vendors out there that allow you to convert that qualitative to quantitative and make it a number, and then that number represents from a 1 to 10, kind of on a scale of critical to low, right? And then you can rank those vulnerabilities, or those, we call them findings at that point, and then make a determination on which ones you want to start fixing first, right? Because obviously there's only so many hours in a day. I think you and I talked about that recently. And then, there's only so much money in the budget, right? There's only so much resources available. So companies tend to, organizations tend to prioritize their vulnerabilities or findings and then start to work them off from critical to low. Some of the things or some of the findings that we present in our report, right? The customer may actually have answers for, or they may actually have other mitigating factors to lessen the risk, right? Or lessen the exposure, right? Because, we may find some vulnerabilities while we're on the inside network, and we may think they're more critical than others, where the customers say, hey, well, we actually have these other mitigating factors in place to help lessen the risk that, we may not have been exposed to during the assessment, right? So at any rate, to kind of go back. Customers, they do their qualitative and quantitative, analysis. They figure out what's most important to them, prioritize them, and then execute accordingly.
Okay. Now, I imagine that with SLEDs, there's a huge compliance overload issues. And what are some of those issues that they may be facing?
Within SLED?
Yes.
Yeah. So from a compliance standpoint, I think it's going to depend on whatever framework they're using. If they're using the cybersecurity framework, a lot of it is, they're building and developing their own security program, right? And they're building all of these requirements, right? So that way they can hold themselves accountable for their actions going forwards, right? So from a compliance standpoint, they may build a policy to say, hey, we want passwords to be 25 characters long or something, you know what I mean? And then they hold themselves in compliance with that, right? And then they tune and train their tools to detect certain things that may be out of compliance, right? And do their reporting that way for the cybersecurity framework. For risk management framework, back to NIST. We find those requirements a lot in federal systems that have to meet FISMA, but still a lot of state governments and organizations do like to map back to NIST. Within the NIST RMF, a lot of the organizations tend to take them verbatim. So from a compliance standpoint, you're either compliant or you're not, right? And NIST kind of lays out the frameworks for those. I would say, with those two frameworks, not getting into Center for Internet Security, some other ones, but I would say a lot of organizations struggle with not necessarily the same things, but a lot of common things, right? Password security is one of them, right? We find some organizations, they're pretty good on the outside, or they're pretty good with cloud-based services, right? They don't have to do a whole lot there. A lot of the cloud vendors, they implement a lot of those safeguards already. But a lot of custom developed things within organizations, or products that they may use internally, don't necessarily map, don't map to their compliance policy, and they're finding different things that pop up here and there. But I would say password security is a big one. They also have, we've found, go with password reuse within applications, even outside of the environment. There's a lot of administrative things that organizations don't tend to follow. We find some organizations that even wear their corporate or their organizational badges and credentials outside of their environment, exposing, a lot of OPSEC things, right, that are concerns, right? So those are some administrative, some physical things. I could go on and on and on, but a lot of it from a compliance standpoint is, A, do you even have a compliance program, right, mapped to some type of framework, and B, are you really following it? And I think the mileage will vary there, and there's a different variance between different organizations as to what things they typically follow and what things they don't, right? So it's different.
Now, I know one of the things that when you're dealing with state, local governments, you got to deal with legacy systems. And I'm just curious, what strategy you recommend using securing outdated systems without blowing through their budget?
Oh man, so I think it depends, right? There's a lot of technical debt, in this industry, and there are a lot of organizations using, some outdated architecture, or even just, physical systems in general, right? Most of our customers are in some type of hybrid environment where they have some type of cloud and some type of physical, and they've kind of figured out, hey, we want to do, some of them are still testing the waters because they don't know, because, to them it's semi-variable pricing once they put it in the cloud, because they don't know how much of those resources they're going to use, right? There's no, I wouldn't say there's any one good answer, but I would say, trying to migrate some of those things, some of your your systems that can move to the cloud, you move to the cloud. Some of them you can't move to the cloud, right? And you kind of need that bare metal system running, especially some of the ones in the that do operational technology, industrial control systems, SCADA, and so forth, right? They have their own, they have their own software, their own hardware specific from the vendors, right? So there's things that they can't move to the cloud, but I would say things that are, fairly simple in nature that you can move to would be, would be the most advantageous, right? From a software perspective, right? I would think, majority of all of our clients are all using, 365 out on the cloud, right? They're not using, a whole lot of those Microsoft services, internally anymore, installing them off of a DVD, thank God. So, but there's certainly things that they can transition, but a lot of it's going to come down to budget constraints and what they can transition. It just depends.
Okay. Well, we're going to take our break for our sponsor, and we're going to pick it back up on a second half of the show from after the break. So I'll see you on the other half, Ray.
Sounds good.
The playbook for growing a local business online is simple. Capture new leads, conversationally convert those leads into sales, turn those customers into positive reviews, and then reactivate those customers into repeat buyers. And that's exactly what our platform does. In order to consistently generate new leads, you first need to be found. The quickest way to get search engines like Google to put your business at the top of search results is by having a steady flow of positive reviews. With our platform, you can show up in search and stand apart from your local competition by easily collecting new customer reviews through text. But getting found is only the beginning. Most consumers choose the first business that responds to them. So unless you start conversations with potential customers almost instantly, they'll go somewhere else. That's why we make starting conversations with website visitors as easy as clicking a button, connecting you instantly through text message so the conversation doesn't end when they leave your website. And we bring all your leads, no matter where they come from, into a single conversation stream that supports text, email, video messaging, Google Business Chats, and even Facebook and Instagram DMs, so you can respond faster and more efficiently than ever. When it comes to turning all those conversations into customers, we make collecting payments just another convenient part of the combo, so you get paid faster no matter how they prefer to pay. Next, you'll want to turn your new customers into happy reviews, which is a snap with our new review request quick actions. The more conversations and customers you generate, the easier it becomes to drive repeat business. We make reactivating contacts into customers as easy as, yup, you guessed it, the push of a button. With bulk actions, you can send out text and email campaigns to generate new sales whenever you have a new update, promotion, or story to tell. We make modern online marketing simple. Let's start growing your business today.
And we're back. Again, this is King Connections Podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm here with Raymond Nutting from nDepth Security. And we're talking about cybersecurity and particularly the SLED industry. And now we want to continue our conversation from where we left off. And I kind of want to shift our focus to risk versus reality. And my question, Ray, was how do you explain the difference between a vulnerability scan report and a true penetration test to non-technical decision makers?
Well, that's a good question. So I would say a lot of the decision makers are, they're not technology, they're not technical experts. So, we try to, simplify some of the findings and things within our reports, so that way they can understand and make good informed decisions on to where they need to invest resources, time, and money, right, to correct some of those deficiencies. From a vulnerability assessment standpoint, vulnerability assessments, they really identify areas of concern that usually can be mitigated with a patch or configuration change or something like that, right? So we incorporate those into our reports and kind of tailor it to whoever the audience is going to be, who's going to consume those results, right? And a lot of times it could be executives, it could be IT staff, it could be they have their own security staff who review those things and implement those safeguards. From penetration testing, though, the difference is that with our penetration testing reports, we also include proof of concepts. We include walkthroughs, so that way we can demonstrate how we took that vulnerability, how we exploited that vulnerability, and then the true impact, right? One of the things that is very beneficial for our customers are just pictures and screenshots, right? They say, a picture speaks 1,000 words, and that's so very true. So our customers have been very thankful for a lot of the attention to detail within these reports to make sure that they can truly understand, because not just we'll use what are called finding cards, right? So if we identify different findings within a information system or during an engagement, right? Could be physical, could be wireless, could be something we found on the network. But anyway, we'll annotate it, we'll provide illustration, we'll also provide that walkthrough, right, for the customer. So that way they can say, okay, they executed this command syntax, they did this step next, they did this step next. So that way they can validate that, oh, yep, that is a finding, right? And then within our references, within the finding card, we'll provide remediation guidance, we'll provide references to, hey, this is also, this is the common problem found on, and you can read about it here, right? So that way we can also inform them on why it's important and how we came up to our decision as to, the certain severity level for the finding, right? So vulnerability assessments really are consumable reports for the IT staff to kind of mitigate some of those vulnerabilities through patches and so forth. A little bit less detail, but the penetration testing reports are in more detail and provide those walkthroughs as to why those vulnerabilities are important to fix and how we exploit it.
Okay. Now let's talk about some of the biggest threats that we see today. In your experience, what are the top cybersecurity threats that SLED organizations are facing right now?
Ransomware, right? Ransomware is a big one. The biggest issue is, well, I won't say issue, but a lot of the ransomware stems from emails getting into the organization, or some employee clicking on something, downloading something, installing something they shouldn't be, right? So that all maps back to that compliance thing we were talking about, right? So with the ransomware, I find a lot of organizations lack proper phishing training, and what I mean by that is they'll use some type of subscription service, costs X amount of hundreds of dollars a year, maybe a couple $1,000s a year, and then they'll do a couple phishing exercises that are very unrealistic, right? So your organization in general doesn't get the actual threat, right? They just get a superficial threat that is likely unrealistic, right? I'm not saying all of them, but I'm giving you some, just some common understanding is that we'll go in and then they'll ask us to do a phishing exercise, and they'll say, okay, tell us what you can about the organization, and identify some targets that you can spearfish, within the campaign, and we'll bring back a list of targets, and then we'll build custom templates and within emails, and we'll send some things. Either way, we have a very high success rate, right, of getting clicks, engaging in the forum, and all that stuff, and we provide all that data and metrics back to the customer, right? I can tell you it's a funny story. It's kind of bad on our part, but I'll share it anyway. We did a phishing exercise with a customer, and we, when we executed the campaign, we had 100% success rate within the organization, and it got so bad that the virtual infrastructure that we were hosting, our exploits from actually crashed for a little bit because we weren't anticipating everybody to be clicking on stuff. So it's kind of funny internal story that we share with them. We were able to, obviously, to recover from that, but it just caused us a couple second downtime. But it was just it was kind of comical. Like, wow, we didn't think we would be that successful. You know what I mean? And when you take a step back, and you think about it, it's like, well, this company or this organization, they do phishing training, right? And it's like, how are we so successful, right? It's because they weren't accustomed to that type of threat, right? They weren't accustomed to that type of attack, right? So I think some of the training, within the organizations, if they were a little bit more refined, a little bit more realistic, and like I said, it's not every organization, but I think that improving that type of training with realistic scenarios can go a long way to help combat some of the ransomware attacks, right? And combat organizations, employees clicking on things, right? I mean, you have endpoint response software that monitors that stuff, can block it, firewalls that can block things, right? But then there's those things that just get out of hand, right? But just training your staff so they know, hey, think before you click, right? Type of thing can go a long way. You touched on another one, aging infrastructure and technical debt. I think that is I think not just a challenge, but a risk to organizations. We do find a lot of outdated software and outdated equipment that is not just outdated, it's just end of life, right? And customers, it's hard for them to upgrade some of their legacy stuff because of cost, right? Or the special sauce that's running on that infrastructure. So that's another challenge. I would say lack of maturity in cyber, not having, we talked about some frameworks, some organizations, they don't have the means to put together a cybersecurity program. They don't have the resources to support it. Case in point, I talked about limited resources. Some of these organizations where we provide, the test results, whether it's a vulnerability assessment or penetration testing, some of them are already doing some type of scanning, whether they have a compliance framework that they're mapping to or not. They're using some automated tools to identify vulnerabilities. And they like, hey, we do this on a regular basis. We're analyzing the results. We're updating, we're patching, and so forth, right? But then, we'll come in and we'll see these problems, right? It's like, well, you didn't have it scanning this subnet, or you didn't have it looking at this, or you didn't have it tailored to do this, or so forth, right? So it's like, when you deliver a report to an organization, they have like 50 critical findings. I'm just kind of going out there, but if you deliver a report, they have 50 findings that now they have to fix. It's just like, well, they're a team of 2 people who are in the IT staff who manage thousands of assets, just inherited 300 hours of additional work, right? So we go back to that prioritizing things to work off, those vulnerabilities, and constantly staying engaged with the customer, helps mitigate that. We can help them, regression testing as they start to fix some of those vulnerabilities. But limited resources is another one. Like I said, lack of maturity in cyber. And another one that's coming up, actually it's been in industry for a while, is artificial intelligence, machine language, autonomous systems. That's kind of like the future of not just of SLED, but of industry, right? So there's a lot of buzzwords out there. Everybody can do AI. It's comical, but it's certainly scary. You know what I mean? When you're working the SLED market, and you're already failing to keep up with industry as it is. Not everything's migrated to the cloud that should be, and now you've got AI and machine language, autonomous systems, and all this other new language and stuff, right? That's coming into the market. So could be very overwhelming for some of these organizations, especially acquisitions department. So yeah, there's lots of things we could talk about, but I would say those are some of the big ones that are some of the cybersecurity challenges that those organizations are facing.
Yeah, you mentioned one in particular that I really want to point out again, and that's small team challenges. Many SLED organizations have IT teams wearing multiple hats, using subcontractors instead of employees. And so what practical steps can you suggest they can take to improve their security posture?
So one of the things, I mean, just kind of off the cuff, I would say is that if they're relying on industry partners, right, to help with their cybersecurity program, engage early, engage often, and changing out your changing out your support staff or your industry partner. Over time or repetitively, right? I don't know that helps you get to your end state goal, right? So, case in point, if your industry partner, right, is providing cybersecurity assessments, if they're providing maybe CISO as a service, or they're providing those things, I think it's important to stay engaged with them, hold them accountable for their actions and for their support, and make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck, right? Especially when your internal people, different organizations have different turnover rates, right? Especially in this market. There's definitely talent shortages and workforce gaps, and federal industry competing with state industry and so forth to try to get talent, right? So it's really hard, right? So if you lose somebody on your IT staff, and then you have to rely on your industry partner, right? You want to make sure that you're getting the services that you need, right, and that you deserve. So constantly staying engaged with them, and holding them accountable for their actions, and making sure that they're helping you meet the milestones that you want to meet.
Excellent. And making the case for leadership, what's the most effective way for SLED or IT security leaders to make the business case for cybersecurity investments to non-technical executives or elected officials?
It's you hear the thing, cybersecurity is everybody's responsibility. It comes down to language, it comes down to needs, it comes down to prioritization. I think if the organization as a whole is working together and they all have a common understanding as to what the goals are, right, they can certainly all work together to advocate their needs, right, to those decision makers, right, to plead their case. And I think I've seen quite a few organizations over time, be able to plead their case, right, and to get funding where they need it, right, through I mentioned it before, through federal grant programs, through DHS and FEMA and different places that'll offer that type of pricing, or that type of funding, right, to support those initiatives. So I think having that common goal and being able to communicate it effectively would be is probably very important to shed some light on the situation and get the funding they need to support their cybersecurity requirements.
And do you have any practical success stories you want to share? Some experiences you've had working with different SLED organizations?
Yeah, man, there's quite a few of them. I would say, I'll talk to a couple that are, semi high level, but we have a lot of repeat customers, which is really great. I love that because it shows that we're actually providing impact to the organization. We're providing, what they need. You know what I mean? So if as an industry, vendor, right, like nDepth Security, if you're constantly staying engaged with your customer, if you're providing them what they need, they're going to keep coming back to you, right? And that's really great. We've had customers come back and say, hey, we can't raise our, can you come back and do assessments like you did before, but we can't afford any increases, but we want the same type of scope. It's like, sure, absolutely, we'll do that for you, right? Because we're in it for the end state, right? Helping them succeed, right, is what we're all about. So being able to adapt to customers' needs and budget constraints has been a great success story for nDepth and for our customers. From a technical aspect, we've had several customers come to us and say, wow, you guys have found like all this stuff, like our last vendor couldn't even find some of this stuff, right? So that's really rewarding, especially for my staff, because it validates a lot of the technical expertise that they have, and some of the expertise that they bring to the table for our customers, right? So that's been very rewarding. Supporting our customers through retesting efforts, and helping them, really focus their attention on things like we mentioned, prioritization of critical findings. My team stays in there to help the customer really identify what those are, right? Because a lot of them are very technical things, right? And even some of the customers have a hard time understanding, like, what is this, right? So just being there to stay engaged with the customer and providing that level of intimacy, helps them, gain a better understanding of what those problems are and what they're facing, and relying on us, right, is really cool to help them mitigate those problems and move forward and be successful in the organization. So I know they're kind of high level, but I can't stress the most that we've our success story has been our customers, right? And the improvements in their networks and their security posture has been very rewarding. And when we have a repeat customer and we are doing, we execute a pen test engagement one quarter, we provide the results to them, we communicate the findings, they mitigate them, we retest, we come back and we can see that those same issues that we found before are closed and no longer a problem. That's rewarding in itself, right? So I would say we have quite a few success stories over the years, but constantly working with our customers and staying engaged has been a win-win ever since we got into it. So.
Excellent. Let's kind of talk about some of the future outlook. So just looking ahead, how do you see VAT, vulnerability assessment, penetration testing evolving in the next 3 to 5 years for SLED organizations?
Yeah, so vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, cybersecurity in a whole, IT services, all that stuff, kind of bundled into one, right? I would think there's two things there that one in particular for sure, right? And that's going to be, I mentioned already, artificial intelligence, machine learning, autonomous systems. That's already out there today. There's a lot of, nDepth does use AI. We do a lot of, we do quite a bit of things with AI internally, not necessarily using any AI on our customers' network or infrastructure, but we do use AI for some things. And there are quite a few organizations out there using autonomous systems for doing scanning and penetration testing and certain things. And, customers want to, approve of that, right? It can be, kind of, well, what is that thing going to do? You know what I mean? When it's touching my network, when it's touching my system, when it's doing these other things. So I think there's still a little bit of a knowledge gap there between some of the providers providing autonomous systems to do testing and the customers really understanding what those systems are doing. I think eventually those gaps will start to close. They'll start to use more autonomous systems for doing automated testing, vulnerability assessments, penetration testing, and so forth, to help streamline some of that effort. We're working on some of that now. So I think that's kind of a future aspect to where a lot of the, I wouldn't say a lot of, but a good portion of the technical things that are being done today can be done, through those types of AI systems. That's from the testing side of it. From the acquisition side, from procuring these services or procuring services from vendors and so forth, I think I would like to, personally, I think they're going to probably hope to work towards a more streamlined process. I know there's certain contract vehicles that states are advocating for to kind of centrify a lot of the acquisition process for vendors, to be able to solicit their services, and for organizations to be able to provide solicitation requests, so vendors can respond to it, to help narrow the focus of certain opportunities and narrow the landscape of some of the qualified vendors for providing certain services. So anyway, so I think there's two certain areas that are the kind of the future for cyber. One is simplified acquisition, and I think two would be, AI in general and how it will help streamline some of the testing that goes on within vulnerability assessments and penetration testing. So.
Okay. I know one of the questions that came up in talking to other cybersecurity IT directors was, what practical advice can you give SLED executives, decision makers on how to select a cybersecurity vendor for their network testing?
Don't base it strictly on cost, right? So I think IT organizations and IT, decision makers within those organizations tend to rely strictly on cost, right? And that is although cost is important, I think that it should only be part of the equation, right? So I think some of the things they should be looking for from qualified vendors, look for ISO certifications, right? nDepth Security, we're ISO 17020 accredited cybersecurity inspection body. We've actually we've been accredited for over 4.5 years for doing, network, for doing web application testing, for doing, physical, for doing mobile application testing, open source intelligence gathering, right? So we have an abundance of qualified professionals to do that, and we're accredited, right? You should also look for organizations who are SOC 2 compliant, right? So they're going to be holding your data, right? So you want to make sure that they have necessary, restrictions, or they're following certain, protocols to securing your data and making sure that it's secure. You want, a cybersecurity organization who has their own cybersecurity program, right? So, for nDepth, we're tied to the cybersecurity maturity model, CMMC. We have our own, cybersecurity program that we use for our systems, for our people, for our processes, right? Organizations that you rely on to do testing, right? They should have their own, cybersecurity program, right? So I see, in some of the acquisition, or some of the solicitations, so forth, that come out, some of that is evident, right, that they're looking at that. And I would say more of the mature organizations are evaluating vendors under that context, right, to make sure they're holding their vendors accountable, right, to make sure that they're qualified, to make sure that they have their own programs in place, right? But I've seen quite a few out there from much smaller organizations to where they're not even thinking about that, right? They're sending out a request for proposal for testing. It's a one-pager, and none of that's on there. They're just like, we just want some testing. You know what I mean? So it's just like, well, that's great and everything, but it's, who do you want testing your system? Who do you want providing those results? Do you want a reliable vendor who can provide that level of service, right? Or are you just looking strictly from a cost perspective? So I think there needs to be a better balance there from some of those decision makers. That's not to say nDepth needs to win everything, right? That's not what I'm saying. But there's lots of great organizations out there who do the same type of testing that we do, right? And there's a huge market for it, and there's a huge need for it, right? So I would just say that keeping that organization accountable for the services that they provide should be high up on that list when making a determination as to what vendor you want to choose to provide cybersecurity for your organization.
Okay. And as we get down to our last two questions before we wrap up, I want to, and you talked a little bit about this in your last answer, but I want you to expand a little bit more.
Sure.
Why would a particular agency choose nDepth Security? What are some of the things that you all provide? You mentioned certifications, but in addition to certifications.
Yeah. So, we've been in business for over 11 years. We touch, our testers are highly experienced. We're a veteran-powered organization. Over 30% of the company, of all of our personnel are coming from a branch of service. from the military, which is great. So we bring that level of experience to the table. We do a lot of testing within the federal community and also within commercial community. So we have a vast perspective of industry and the different things that we see within organizations within those industries. So being able to bring that level of experience, right, amplified by our our accredited business practices. We're also ISO 9001, our quality management system. We're ISO 17020, right? So we bring a lot of not just experience but qualifications to the table for executing this type of work, right?
And you also do a lot of work in the community. Can you talk a little bit about some of the community work that you all do?
Yeah. So over the past 11 years, ever since I started the company, one of the things we do is we like to get out in the community and help those in need. We sponsor a lot of different events, different types of golfing events for cyber vets. We've helped some schools in the local community in Maryland, Pennsylvania, with various learning activities. We actually send some of our testers to the schools to do some of the training, with some of the high school students, some of the college students, and within the community. So that way we can engage with them early to understand, hey, is this the profession that you want to get in? We try to teach them some technical stuff. Kids like to touch different, some of the equipment that we have that's kind of unique. We also do a lot of, we've participated in different types of, resume review processes within colleges and, talking to industry to, help them, navigate some of the complexities of, where I should go next. What role do I need to go, get into, or what certification? That's another big one. Like, what certification do I need to get into? So we try to stay involved, and we try to help educate people in this field, right? Because it's important, right? So our, they say our youth is our future, right? I know that with my kids. So we try to stay engaged and try to stay active in the community as much as we can through sponsoring of events and different learning activities where we can be involved.
Excellent. As our last question, as we wrap things up, and I definitely want to again thank you, Ray, for your investment of time and joining us today. As we wrap up, what advice would you give our listening SLED leaders as far as takeaways they can take away from this interview?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is, I'm sure they know the SLED environment is very complex. It's very diverse. Everybody has their own requirements, stemming around cybersecurity or different cybersecurity environments. I would say probably the most important thing to understand is that you don't face these problems alone, right? A lot of other organizations share the same problems that you do, right? We see that's evident in all the different types of assessments that we've done. East Coast to West Coast, right? We've touched a lot of different organizations. So you're sharing a lot of the same issues. Some of the most important things to consider, if you don't have already, establishing some type of framework that you can map off of. We talked about compliance, right? Holding your technology and your people and your processes, accountable, right? Within the organization, mapping to some type of compliance, testing often, right? And doing it the right way and not the wrong way, right? So you want to make sure that you have knowledgeable people on staff that can execute that type of work internally, and when you can't, right, outsource it. And when you outsource it, make sure the vendors that you choose are, they're either accredited through some type of standard. They're they have their own type of cybersecurity program in place. Such as like CMMC, SOC 2, ISO 27001 something, right? That they're bringing to the table, so that way that your data and your information is secure, right? So make sure through vendor selection you're pretty rigorous in your process, and you take more things in accountability other than how much the cost is, right? So there's a lot of things that we talked about, but yeah, for sure, you're not in alone. SLED space is very big. It's only going to get bigger, and the challenges you're facing today are going to be different than the challenges you're facing tomorrow. So when you're looking for an industry vendor who's that's willing and able to support, definitely engage early with them. And somebody like nDepth Security, we're willing to help. Feel free to reach out anytime.
Again, Ray, thank you for that. And again, thank you for being on the King Connections podcast. And until our next show, I want everybody to connect with intent. Thank you again.
Thanks. Take care, King.
You too.